Are you ready to bin your Sentro knitting machine? I've seen loads of people online say that the Sentro is junk or unusable, but the truth is that a lot of the time these problems are caused by user error. In this video I'm going to give you a few tips on using your machine, so hopefully those of you that have given up on it will give it another try and hopefully have a more successful attempt. Tip number one is making sure that you use the correct thickness yarn. It does tolerate a few different types of thicknesses, but anything too thick will jam in the needles and will cause problems. You'll know if the yarn is too thick because you'll find that often the needles catch, and as it's knitting the yarn will actually catch on top of one of the needles and will need pushing down each time. You don't want to force your machine if you hear it making a loud noise. Instead you go forwards and backwards a little bit to see if you can loosen up the tight stitch. If not, you just need to manually push the stitch down. When using the machine I tend to go with a decent weight double knit yarn or a lightweight Aran yarn. This is the sort of yarn that I go for. It's not too thick, so it will create enough coverage. You will get some small holes, but it won't be too bad. If you use a thicker yarn such as this one, you'll find that although it will give you a nice thick knitted panel with no holes, you will find that it does jam quite a bit. So it's starting to jam slightly here, but if you see where it's catching, you can just push that down there. If it starts to feel like it's catching a lot more, and it is really starting to, as the stitches are going on, it is starting to feel like more tension, so you want to really avoid putting too much pressure onto this. You can push it through to a degree, but if it really sticks you do need to really go through and push it so that you're not damaging your machine. The other thing with that yarn that I've just shown you is that is part merino wool, and it does have a tendency to split, which takes me to my next tip. Not only does your yarn thickness matter, but the yarn material matters. I normally tend to go for an acrylic yarn or acrylic blend, but you don't want anything that is too loosely spun. So you don't want a yarn that the twist is not too tight. So for instance, this one has got some natural merino wool in it, and if I pull it to the camera, I don't know if you can see, it easily splits. I can quite easily get my fingers and pull it apart, whereas with the acrylic yarn it's got more of a twist to it and it takes more pulling apart to ruin it. So I tend to go for the higher twist yarns, as that works much better. You're much less likely to split your yarn and get it caught up on the needles. If you hear a loud noise when using your machine, just have a look either side of the yarn feeder. You want to look at the side that is going towards your yarn feeder. Normally a needle to the left or right of that will have a piece of yarn that is stuck on top. Now to fix it, all you have to do is push the yarn back down over the top. My next tip is not to knit too quickly. Don't get too carried away when you first cast on. Your first few rows tend to be a little bit more particular in the way that you knit them, so do take a bit of care and just go really slowly for the first couple of rows until it starts to get a rhythm and it picks up an even tension. My favourite casting method is to use the alternating needles, and I use a few rounds of waste yarn before I use my main yarn and carry on knitting with it. One of the reasons I do it this way is that I get a nice neat finish at the end when I use my crochet hook to just seal off the end of the work of the live stitches and remove the working yarn, because you find that you have got a nice even tension by the time you've done a few rows of your waste yarn. Tension is another tip. You want to be making sure that you are using the right tension hole for your yarn. So depending on the thickness of the yarn, test it in the different holes and see which one it stays firm but not struggling to be pulled through. So you want a bit of tension on it but not excessively so. You also want to make sure that your ball of wool is flowing freely. You don't want any snags on it as it's pulling through into the machine. So I actually rewind all of my balls of wool that I'm going to use in the knitting machine into centre pull balls like this one, so it comes out of the centre, and I find that that's really nice for keeping it sat somewhere neatly and not being thrown around, and it tends to tangle a lot less. So I've got a ball winder that I use to do that. All in all, I think the Sentro is a great little machine. It is perfectly usable if you take a bit of care. It's not going to be as robust as the Addy, but at £40 against 250, nobody should be expecting the same performance from both machines. What this machine does do is allow you to see whether or not you like using a circular knitting machine. If you're going to use it for commercial volumes, then you might want to upgrade to an Addy, but if you're just using it as an everyday hobbyist for the occasional project, then the Sentro is going to perfectly do the job. I know some people have a bit of a problem with the row counter, but some people use external row counters, so that's a problem that can be resolved quite easily, or you could just count. I've not had a problem with my row counter, but I don't know if that's just me and I'm lucky, but I do try and take care with the machine. The same goes for the tension guide. I know some people have had problems with that snapping, but mine has got a bit of wear to it, but it still functions perfectly fine, and I've had my machine a couple of years now, and I've certainly done a fair few projects on it in that time. One thing I would say is if you're taking care when using your machine, making sure that your yarn is not getting caught in the tension guide, or between the tension guide and the yarn feeder at the top, or between the ball and the yarn tension guide, then it shouldn't be putting too much strain on that, and it shouldn't snap unless it's put under excess pressure. I hope some of these tips have been helpful, and I really hope that you go and enjoy your Sentro knitting machine. If you've got a problem that I haven't covered in this video, please let me know down in the comments, and I will do my best to try and answer your problems. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to keep up to date with my future videos, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Take care.